For our listeners who might not be familiar with you, who are you and what do you do?
So I'm a Jesuit priest. I work in New York City with America Media, which publishes America Magazine. Actually, we're celebrating our 109th anniversary on the day that we're taping this. So it's been a long-standing tradition of the Jesuits to publish this sort of the review of faith and culture. Another elevator line we use is a smart Catholic take on faith and culture.
Smart Catholic take.
Yeah, so I work as an associate editor and director of audience development. And I was just joking before we got started that the longer your title is, the more undefined your job is. But I work a lot in our digital outreach. I work with new products. I work a lot with our podcasts. I do a number of different things.
So let's talk about that for a second. I think a lot of people think of a publishing company or a magazine just as, we produce the content, people come to us and read it. It sounds like you're trying to have a more proactive relationship with readers.
Yeah, I think a lot of media companies thought of themselves that way, and many of them are now bankrupt or no longer existing. There's so much information available, and I think the internet changed a number of things. And so we have to struggle with why would people want to have our content? I believe in our content, and I think, I was telling someone, I feel like sometimes like a health food salesman, like I really do think our content is better for you and you can enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a lot of what I would call noise out there. So how are you going to reach people? And that also involves a great deal of listening. I think that's important. So for my own pastoral background, that fits well. Now the question then becomes, how do I do that in a media company? How do you institutionalize that? How do you operationalize, pastoral skills that make more sense when someone stops by your office as a priest? Than how do I do that on Twitter? How do I do that on Facebook? What are the ways to go about that? Those are big questions for us, and I think they're big questions for not just us, but for the entire media industry. But even more specifically, those that are involved in faith-based works, that's a big question.
It's interesting, for a pastor, priest, or a deacon who's preaching at a parish on the weekend, they're going to get a very tiny bit of feedback, if any, and it's either going to be totally unrelated or spot on. I can only imagine what you guys go through. Whereas, when you post an article to America, there could be any number of bits of feedback that come through the comments and that sort of thing. Take us behind the scenes. I'm sure you guys have plenty of eye rolls when you see some of the comments that people post to articles. How do you process that? Is that just part of this new business in terms of online media?
I think we're all very human. So of course, yes, there are eye rolls. There's moments where I have Nerf guns at my desk, so I'll fire them at things. But I think one of the key components, and it sounds a little Pollyannish, but we mean it honestly. One of the things that, and it's not just me, there's a number of my colleagues who are actually a little more in the weeds, answering all those questions and comments and things that come in and keeping track of social media. The thing to keep in the front of our minds is that there's a person there. It's so easy to forget sometimes in a war of ideas, or a question that seems to be leading somewhere, or someone that missed a point of an article. Like there's a person there, so you're constantly asking what are the desires, the hopes, the dreams of the person behind there, and how can you respond to that? Now sometimes it's not all. Sometimes you get what we affectionately call trolls. Well, that's hard to be pastoral to someone that's truly trolling you. But then the question is, how do you respond to the needs of the person? And that's a pastoral skill that I think people develop over time, and you adjust with the different tools that are available. We have found that sometimes the comments is not the best place for that, but a Facebook group can be a place for that, where people are really engaged. We've also found that sometimes the comments are the place for that if you lead people through it. So it depends on how you engage these different interlocutors. But for us, it's really, I don't know that there's a great magic to it, but there's a lot of time that goes into it. And that can be hard for nonprofits, and often faith-based are nonprofit like we are. How do you find the right time for that? We use something called buffer reply, because what happens often, so you imagine like America, which takes an editorial position on something. Well, an editorial is written not by one person, but frequently by the editorial board or a group of editors that have got together. Well, they all hold different areas of expertise. So when a question comes back, the person on social media might not have the expertise to answer some of the details there. So we use this tool that helps us flag questions so that, asynchronously, so, it comes in at midnight, but then the next morning you can ping 2 or 3 editors that would be able to give you links or feedback or other things that can help the person who's asking that question get more information about why America would take that position or set that up. And so for us to generate that ability to communicate amongst ourselves and share our expertise with each other so that we can share that with the sort of people that are running point, that's been a crucial move for us, which we're ramping up more and more. We also are starting more Facebook groups around particular topics. We're finding that to be very helpful.
What would you say is hot today in terms of engagement with your audience that maybe was a little colder 5 years ago?
That was colder 5 years ago. So the question is
maybe didn't exist.
Yeah. I think with Pope Francis and his papacy and the style that he has for discussing what's going on in the church, what's really become quite hot is when Francis advocates a pastoral approach or says, how do we reach out to people that are on the margins or who we thought might not be part of what we thought was the church group or whatever? How do we reach out to them? How do we talk to them? That has become a very hot topic. So we tend to do 2 pieces. You say what Pope Francis said and challenge the church to, when he's tell them to get outside the church walls, that's a challenge. So I understand when the church receives that with a little bit of what are we supposed to do now? How do we figure this out? So we write that, and then that's a newsy piece, right? But then the next piece is the explainer piece, which helps try to put some context on why the Pope would say that. How does this fit into tradition? Where does it come from in history? How does this play in with everything that's been going on for a while? And those are really important things. We were all joking today. We have a daily news huddle. So we meet and talk about what everything's going on. And there's this video of Pope Francis talking to this young boy in Italy because he's doing these I call them papal visits. It's actually bishop visits because he's the Bishop of Rome. And this kid was asking a question about his father, is my dad. And I've watched it twice and helped edit some stuff on it. And I still cry when I look at it. It's a tearjerker. But there's been some feedback on the Twitter sphere and other things about, why is he saying that his dad could be in heaven? And I find that question kind of sad. Can we use our hearts and our imagination here? But then we're talking about, well, how do we explain that to someone, right? Yeah. How do we explain that this pastoral response is actually completely in line with doctrine, and there's a whole history of how this all fits together? That's I think a service we can provide to what the church and the world, because Pope Francis has become so newsworthy to secular media, but they don't always have the background to explain what's going on there. So they just see, well, this is a doctrinal problem. Now there's no heaven or hell. No, how do we work through this concept of mercy and what that means?
Yeah, that was a classic moment. I had my whole family watch it, and it was a classic Francis moment, this beautiful pastoral scene, and it's tugging at your heartstrings. And then you say, wait a minute, maybe there's another layer here. Right. And theologically, what is he saying? And was he really saying that? Or, it was a great moment.
And I think that's great for people to explore that faith, because that's also encouraging people to have what I would call to move from grade school catechism understandings of theology to true adult understanding. And that's to grapple with these questions. We believe in a loving and merciful God. What does that mean in conjunction with free will and our ability to reject love? And how do we understand that working out in our own salvation history and those of our friends and our family? I think those are really good, important adult faith questions. I mean, I wouldn't bring that up if I was teaching 4th grade catechetical stuff. I would bring other things up, but yeah, so you watch that kind of get played out.
I'm sure you guys, you look at other magazines and newspapers and you kind of keep an eye on it. And I know for myself, and I'm just looking in my Chrome browser tabs here. I have
Google knows all,
but I've got NCR Online, National Catholic Register, America, and Aletheia. And I'm curious how you all as a team look at America and say, you know what, we're a little bit different from these other publishers.
Yeah, in some way, America intends to be a place where a discussion and analysis of everything that's going on is happening. So America does 2 things. It will frequently break church news, But then after that, we're not doing a lot of breaking secular news, but we are doing a lot of analyzing from the church's perspective what's going on in secular news. So there's a lot of analysis there. So sometimes we'll get some pushback from people like, why would you have this person on there? They've said this before or that. Well, if this person influences public opinion, then we want to talk to them and we want to understand what they're saying. We want to listen. And then we want to also demonstrate how we hear what they're saying and how that can be received by the church. So we're often doing what I call translating the church to the world and the world to the church, which is very typical for Jesuits. It's a Jesuit work. It was founded by the Society of Jesus in 1909. And it's what Pope Benedict asked the Jesuits to do. He noted, he said, you need to be on that margin, where you're explaining the world to the church and the church to the world. And he said, and it's a hard place to be sometimes, because both groups might tell you that you're off the rails, right? And so that happens, but it's also what we signed up for. It's frequently the type of personality, the type of training, the people that are really interested in the Society of Jesus. That's the type of work we are interested in. So we gravitate toward those types of works. And I think that, that's, for me, that's the most fun. So I like to be there.
It's a good space for evangelization in the broadest, expression of the word. Let's talk about Jesuitical, the podcast, and one, what is it? And two, explain. I mean, I love podcasts. I listen to them every day on my way, to and from work. My wife, on the other hand, she said, I don't dig podcasts. It's not my medium, So I'm not saying try to convince her, because I'm not sure she could be convinced. But there are people out there who would listen to more podcasts if maybe they got into the rhythm of it or the routine. And why might Jesuitical be one of those?
I think Jesuitical it's by three young, what they call them, hip lay editors. They always add new adverbs every week. So they're eternally hip, currently lay, and they challenge their readers to give them new adverbs. But it's by three young editors who work here at the magazine. And basically what they wanted to do is just find a place to talk about faith and culture in a way they would talk with their friends. So when there's a line in the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. So that's the retreat that sort of Ignatius, it's one of his great gifts to the church and to the Society of Jesus and to the world at large. And he has a line where he asks you to pray to God and speak to God as one friend speaks to another. So they're aiming to do it as one friend speaks to another. So the joke with Jesuitical is they always start with a drink recipe, because they were frequently hanging out in a bar with a bunch of their friends talking about the latest news, and then faith enters into that. So their goal is for you to feel like you are part of that conversation. There's three of them. So it's Olga Segura, Ashley McKinless, and Zach Davis. And they want the reader to feel part of that. Now, podcasts are a great medium for that, because there's an intimacy of having these people's voices in your ears, and you feel close and like you're part of the conversation. And that's why we use that medium for this style of what we're talking about. So they talk about Catholic news, and then they interview someone very interesting. And it can be from like sort of the Catholic world, or it can be from the wider world. They had like the last two episodes, Guy Consolmagno, who's the Jesuit brother. He's the director of the Vatican Observatory. And the week before that, it was Sarah Silverman. Like, those are very different people with very different views on the world and faith and church.
Next week, The Rock.
But the point there is to show how faith is part of daily life, can be part of daily life. And it's specifically, I think, aiming towards people that may have been involved in a Newman Center or campus ministry in college, and now find themselves away from that a little bit, and are looking for some of those conversations that would have naturally happened, in the social gatherings after Mass or before Mass, or in the Newman Center or in the campus ministry office, to provide a place where that can keep happening. And it's interactive. They're always asking for questions from their listeners. They're very active on Twitter and responding to things. They have a special patrons section, so people that pledge like $2 or $3 a month, or up to $25 a month, they have special video chats with them and set that up. And what's really funny for me is we were working on this and planning this. The hardest part to put together was the final part, which is the part we get the most letters about, which is called Consolations and Desolations, which is essentially faith sharing. Faith sharing on a podcast. And the hosts find it hard because they have to meet with me every week and talk about their faith life. And so it's, you cannot fake that. Like you have to be involved. You have to let questions of faith and doubt and everything that's going on become part of your prayer, and then talk, and then you have to talk about that. And as you know, this is creating a podcast, and you have to distill that too, because your first attempt is probably far too long with too many details that no one can hear. And how do you get to the essence of that? So that component has sent so many emails back to us of people sharing their own stories. Like, you don't have to share this on air, but you said this and it caused me to think about this, and it gives them the opportunity to share that. That vulnerability that they display enables other people to respond in kind. And so that's, for us, that's, aside from numbers and sustainability, that's when it's working.
The Holy Father's new document, Rejoice and Be Glad, it's just out, well, I guess less than a week now. That's kind of exciting. And I know you guys have run a number of posts related to it. What's the feedback you're getting, and how do you see this perhaps applying to young adults in particular?
I think it's in one sense, it's not terrifyingly shocking, because if you read a document by Pope Francis, this one follows a similar,
very readable,
very readable, very sort of relatable to daily life, and constantly pushing you to realize that this is not about some kind of academic practice that only happens in a conference or only happens in a church place, but like this is part of, like, the example of the person grocery shopping, or the example of the person taking care of their kids. Typical kind of like, no, I mean, like your faith life in your life, not like your faith life on Sunday from 11 to 12, but no, what happened today. So that there's not a lot of shock there. I think for young adults particularly, I would say there's two things. There's a couple lines in there. It's not the whole focus, but there's a couple lines in there about the type of discourse that is happening online. And for young adults who swim in that a little more natively than maybe you or I, or a generations older than us, I think those are important parts to pay attention to, because they're being raised and trained in an environment, and they know how to navigate that well, but he's challenging them to help show some serious faith in humanity in that, and the violence that is occurring in the way we have discussions online. And I think that is a part that I would hope young adults pay close attention to, and I hope that they feel a call to creativity there, to these old priests like myself, like, this is how you do it. When I was at campus ministry at the University of Michigan, they were like, Father, we got to teach you Snapchat. Like, first of all, you do it horribly and you don't respond enough. And I was like, I vomited a rainbow, and that's all I thought I was supposed to do. But by the end, I would get requests for confession. I wouldn't do confession on Snapchat, but I would get requests for confession via Snapchat. And so it made me available in another way. So I was asking them to teach me some of that, but at the same time to have a conversation, because I think there's some problems with Snapchat, and there's some superficiality that can be part of that. So we've had this back and forth. So I think there's a call in that. And that's part of kind of the Francis mindset of, like, all right, let's talk about Instagram and Twitter and these daily apps. What does call to holiness mean there?
Yeah. Right.
Not just how you behave at a liturgy, but how do you show that you are a member of the body of Christ in these places, and then call and challenge people to that. And then how do you challenge the makers of these tools in Silicon Valley and everything that's going on to create things that make humanity better? There's also privacy issues with Facebook right now. Yeah. These are huge deals.
Yeah, I love there's a word he uses, and it's zapping. And I'm not sure if that was a translation issue or what, but he's basically talking about we're constantly pinging and we're swiping and this whole thing. And he uses his word zapping. I had to read it a few times, and I'm like, what is he talking about? I love, there's a couple of parts where I think early in the document where he talks about we should emulate the saints and learn from them, but don't be intimidated. Don't let that be sort of a cop-out, like, oh, I'll never be Mother Teresa, so let me go back to mediocrity. No. He says, find your own way, and you still have some responsibility in that.
No, I think those, and that the renewal of the call to holiness, like, this is not a call for the top 0.5% of Christians. No, this is a call for everyone. And I think another thing, pointing out, like, you can become a saint, you get all those famous quotes. I always try to remind people, I imagine most saints were a pain in the butt. And so remember, if you feel like you're not quite there, then you're just on your way to sainthood. And like we get these sort of cleaned up images of saints, but like, no, these were people in process. And he said that very early on in the document. He noted that calling someone a saint or saying that they're holy isn't to say that everything they did was right. He said there are moments in almost every saint's life where they weren't living the gospel, or they did something contrary to the gospel, or they misunderstood something. And he said, we're talking about the long pattern, not just these details. So that helps people remember, who know very much. In my own life, I know very much I did not live up to the gospel at this point today, and have to kind of work through that.
And he models that. I mean, you see it right now as he's really asking for forgiveness for some of the decisions he's made, and he really is living that, and that's a painful thing to live through, but it's a pretty good example at the same time. So
yeah, in an era where we cultivate our social media images, and so you try to hide all of these defects. No, I mean the whole thing in Chile with the bishops. I mean, I thought he was missing it entirely the whole time. People are always like, you're always praising Pope Francis. I was like, well, in Chile, he missed it entirely. Like, he needs to be criticized there. And he admits that. He said, I didn't listen to the right things. And people were deeply hurt, deeply hurt.
And I think I think that, if I can say this, it reflects your Jesuit foundation and this idea of being a smart Catholic. Don't check your brain at the door. God wants you to use your head and your heart, and you can do that. And that means sort of being honest with what you see in the world, and God is there. So Father Eric, really appreciate your time today. And where can we direct folks online to find out more about you and the good work of America?
So americamagazine.org or americamag.org is where you'll find all of our content. If you're interested, specifically, we mentioned Jesuitical Show. So that's on Twitter at Jesuitical Show. It's a podcast. You can find that in Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or whatever app you happen to use to get your podcasts. You can find me on Twitter too, at SunnyDSJ. So my last name is Sundrup. I've been called Sunny most of my life. Many of my students called me Sunny D. That's how I ended up with my Twitter handle.
There you go.
All those are all great places, but americamagazine.org, I would encourage everyone to check that out, to see all the content that America provides on a wide range of topics, we did a review of BoJack Horseman. I'm doing a lot of interviews with interns for our summer internship, and I'm shocked about how many of them said, I asked them, how'd you hear about America? I said, you did this article on BoJack Horseman. I was like, well, we'll do that again next year when we're looking for interns. So there's a lot of content. It's great. It's a great place to check out.
Thanks for being our guest. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
You got it.